Look at this. So there's the inn of the last home, and that's where we're going to start our story. First is the old man, Tika Whalen. So Tika Whalen is a beautiful red-haired girl. So Tika Whalen straightened her back with a sigh, flexing her shoulders to ease her cramped muscles. She tossed the soapy bar rag into the water pail and glanced around the empty room. It was getting harder to keep up the old inn. There was a lot of love rubbed into the warm finish of the wood, but even love and tallow couldn't hide the cracks and splits in the wood in the well-used table or prevent a customer from sitting on an occasional splinter. The inn of the last home was not fancy, not like some she's heard about in Haven. So Haven is a town that is... Okay, so here's a picture of the inn of the last home. And Haven is a town that is like right around the corner. Right now, they are in Solace, and Haven is over there. Solace, Haven. It was comfortable. The living tree in which it was built wrapped its ancient arms around it lovingly, while the walls and fixtures were crafted around the boughs of the tree with such care as to make it impossible to tell where nature's work left off and man's began. The bar seemed to ebb and flow like a polished wave around the living wood that supported it. The stained glass in the window panes cast welcoming flashes of vibrant color across the room. Shadows were dwindling as noon approached. The inn of the last home would soon be open for business. Tika looked around and smiled in satisfaction. The tables were clean and polished. All she had left to do was sweep the floor. She began to shove aside the heavy wooden benches as Odik emerged from the kitchen, enveloped in fragrant steam. Odik is kind of a bigger guy. He owns the place. His name would mean sharing, gifting, making sure everyone is cared for and fed, and handing, which describes his name pretty well. So Otik. And he's famous for his spicy potatoes. That's where they are right now. They're over here. That's where the fiery mountain came down and hit and changed the world. This world used to be something else before. In the past, a fiery mountain came down from the sky and hit it so hard that it changed the landscape. And so these people lived after that happened. And that's called the cataclysm. The cataclysm. Should be another brisk day for both the weather and business, he said, squeezing his stout body behind the bar. He began to set out mugs, whistling cheerfully. I'd like the business cooler and the weather warmer, said Tika, tugging at the bench. I walked my feet off yesterday and got little thanks and less tips. Such a gloomy crowd. Everybody nervous, jumping at every sound. I dropped a mug last night, and I swear. Rhetoric drew his sword. Pah, Odik snorted. Rhetoric's solace seeker guard. They're always nervous. You would be too if you had to work for Hederic, the fanatic. She said, watch it, Tika warned, to cut him off. Odik shrugged. Unless the high theocrat can fly now, he won't be listening to us. I'd hear his boots on the stairs before he could hear me. But Tika noticed he lowered his voice as he continued. The residents of Solace won't put up with much more. Mark my words. People disappearing, being dragged off to who knows where. It's a sad time. He shook his head. Then he brightened. But it's good for business until he closes us down. Tika said gloomily. She grabbed the broom and began sweeping briskly. Even theocrats need to fill their bellies and wash the fire and brimstone from their throats. Odic chuckled. It must be thirsty work. How do you say that word? What is that? Haranguing people? Haranguing people about the new gods day in and day out. He's in here every night. Tika stopped here sweeping and leaning against the bar. Odic, she said seriously, her voice subdued. There's other talk, too. Talk of war, armies massing in the north. And there are these strange hooded men in town, hanging around with the high theocrat, asking questions. Tika stopped her sweeping and leaned against the bar. Odic looked at the 19-year-old girl fondly. She's younger. Reached out and patted her cheek. He'd been father to her ever since her own had vanished so mysteriously. He tweaked her red curls. War, pooh, he sniffed. There's been talk of war ever since the cataclysm. It's just talk, girl. Maybe the theocrat makes it up just to keep people in line. I don't know, Tika frowned. The door opened. Both Tika and Odic started in alarm and turned to the door. They had not heard footsteps on the stairs, and that was uncanny. The inn of the last home was built high in the branches of a mighty Valenwood tree, as was every other business in Solace with the exception of the blacksmith shop. The townspeople had decided to take to the trees during the terror and chaos following the cataclysm, and thus Solace became a tree town, one of the few truly beautiful wonders left on Krynn. Sturdy wooden bridge walks connected the houses, and businesses perched high above the ground, where 500 people went about their daily lives. The Inn of the Last Home was the largest building in Solace and stood 40 feet off the ground. Stairs ran around the ancient Valenwood gnarled trunk. As Odic had said, any visitor to the inn would be heard approaching long before he was seen. But neither Tika nor Odic had heard the old man. He stood in the doorway, leaning on a worn oak staff and peering around the inn. The tattered hood of his plain gray robe was drawn over his head, its shadow obscuring the features of his face except for his hawkish, shining eyes. "Can I help you, old man?" Tika asked the stranger, exchanging worried glances with Odic. Was this old man a seeker spy? Eh? The old man blinked. "You open?" "Well," Tika hesitated. "Certainly," Odic said, smiling broadly. "Come in, Greybeard." "Tika, find our guest a chair. He must be tired after that long climb." "Climb?" Scratching his head, the old man glanced around the porch, then looked down to the ground below. "Oh, yes, climb. A great many stairs." Does that mean he's had a lot of kids? Hopefully that's true. With everybody that's in the story. He hobbled inside, then made a playful swipe at Tika with his staff. "Get along with your work, girl. I'm capable of finding my own chair." Tika shrugged, reached for her broom, and began sweeping, keeping her eyes on the old man. He stood in the center of the inn, peering around as though confirming the location and position of each table and chair in the room. The common room was large and bean-shaped, wrapping around the trunk of the valenwood. The tree's smaller limbs supported the floor and ceiling. He looked with particular interest at the fireplace, which stood about 3/4 of the way back into the room. The only stonework of the inn was obviously crafted by dwarven hands to appear to be a part of the tree. He stood in the center of the inn, peering around as though confirming the location and position of each table and chair in the room. The common room was large and bean-shaped, wrapping around the trunk of the valenwood. The tree's smaller limbs supported the floor and ceiling. He looked with particular interest at the fireplace, which stood about 3/4 of the way back into the room. A bin next to the side of the fire pit was stacked high with cordwood and pine logs brought down from the high mountains. No resident of Solace would consider burning the wood of their own great trees. There was a back route out the kitchen. It was a 40-foot drop, but a few of Odic's customers found this setup very convenient. So did the old man. He muttered satisfied comments to himself as his eyes went from one area to another. Then, to Tika's astonishment, he suddenly dropped his staff, hitched up the sleeves of his robes, and began rearranging the furniture. Tika stopped sweeping and leaned on her broom. "What are you doing? That table's always been there." A long, narrow table stood in the center of the common room. The old man dragged it across the floor and shoved it up against the trunk of the huge valenwood, right across from the fire pit, then stepped back to admire his work. "There," he grunted. "Supposed to be closer to the fire pit. Now bring over 2 more chairs. Need 6 around here." Tika turned to Odic. He seemed about to protest, but at that moment, there was a flaring light from the kitchen. A scream from the cook indicated that the grease had caught fire again. He turned to Odic. He seemed about to protest, but at that moment, there was a flaring light from the kitchen. A scream from the cook indicated that the grease had caught fire again. Odic hurried toward the swinging kitchen doors. "He's harmless," he puffed out as he passed Tika. "Let him do what he wants, within reason. Maybe he's throwing a party." Tika sighed and took 2 chairs over to the old man as requested. She set them where he indicated. "Now," the old man said, glancing around sharply, "bring 2 more chairs. Comfortable ones, mind you, over here. Put them next to the fire pit in the shadowy corner." "'Tisn't shadowy," Tika protested. "It's sitting in full sunlight." "Ah," the old man's eyes narrowed. "But it will be shadowy tonight, won't it, when the fire's lit?" "Oh, I suppose so," Tika faltered. "Bring the chairs. That's a good girl. I want 1, right here." The old man gestured at a spot in front of the fireplace. "For me." "Are you giving a party, old man?" Tika asked as she carried over the most comfortable, wear-worn chair in the inn. "A party?" The thought seemed to strike the old man as funny. He chuckled. "Yes, girl. It will be a party such as the world of Kryn has not seen since before the cataclysm. Be ready, Tika Whalen. Be ready." He patted her shoulder, tousled her hair, turned her, and lowered himself, bones creaking, into the chair. "A mug of ale," he ordered. Tika went to pour the ale. It wasn't until she had brought the old man his drink and gone back to her sweeping that she stopped, wondering how he knew her name.